see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch, and this is Dialogues on How to Build a Culture of Empathy. And today I'm here with Annie Axford. Thank you for joining me, Annie.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And Annie, you work in the field of highly sensitive people, and you have a website, and you do podcasts, and you do workshops, and you have other resources around this area. And what we want to do in this dialogue is talk about, what does that really mean, highly sensitive people, and how does it relate to empaths, and how does it, what can we do to build a culture of empathy together? So to begin with, what I wanted to do is maybe look at some of your websites, and we could maybe start with your Facebook page, which I have here. I can actually bring it up. It's called... It has your name, and it says Super Sensitive, and it has a picture of yourself and someone else in a dress. Maybe you could talk about that and introduce that.
It's actually me in the dress. Yeah, so I have a Facebook page that allows me to connect with people that are interested in the work that I do on a regular basis, to check in and have regular kind of inspiration as well as dialogue around what it means and what it's like to be highly sensitive. And in terms of the super sensitive, I offer services to help change the way that we use sensitivity. And that's part of my mission, is to really understand what sensitivity is, as well as change the way we actually use sensitivity and the word sensitivity. Because a lot of times, when we say super sensitive, it has a negative connotation. And so one of the services that I offer is more as like a superpower, being able to be super sensitive and really use sensitivity as a strength.
Oh, yeah. And in the photograph there, what is the significance of that picture of you? How did you kind of choose that to be kind of represent your Facebook page?
Yeah, well, I used a lot of, that's actually a picture of me on my wedding day, and in my wedding dress. And I have a program called Sensitive Leadership, which helps teach the model of the highly sensitive hierarchy of needs, which is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, only working from the top down rather than the bottom up, as I find that's how highly sensitive people work. And so that picture to me signifies that it is me on my wedding day, and that it was kind of a culmination of things for me with my sensitivity that I had really struggled with. I had struggled in my relationships, I'd struggled financially, I'd struggled with my health in all of these different ways. And so to me, that picture signifies that I'm actually jumping in the air, and it's really an experience for me of really being able to actualize all of the things that I had been working toward, to be there in that way on that day.
Oh, great. So let's go to the next site here. I see it's sensitiveandthriving.com is your website, and you want to talk about the site and give a little overview of it?
Yes. Sensitiveandthriving.com started in 2009, when I was first starting to share my experience about being highly sensitive with the world, or in a more public way. And it was meant to be a place for highly sensitive people to come together and share resources, because I had found in my experiences that a lot of times doctors and other human service professionals really didn't understand me in the way that I worked. And so I had to figure a lot of things out on my own. And that's ultimately what led to my model of sensitive leadership. But now Sensitive and Thriving is a place where you can see my take on high sensitivity. You can see my sensitive manifesto. You can also check out, I have what's called Annie's Atlas there, which is a resource, a collection of all of the resources that I found valuable to highly sensitive people. It also includes blog posts and different messages from me. And then I also have different sensitive services that I offer, as I mentioned, sensitive leadership, as well as one-on-one and group services. And then I do every Sunday a live streaming show called Sensitive Sunday Live. And so that's also where you can check that out.
Okay, and then the last resource I know that you have here that I'm familiar with or aware of is beyondthriving.com. It's sensitive leadership. What is that?
Yeah, so that's what I was mentioning. That's an online program where I teach that model of working from the top down with the hierarchy of needs rather than the bottom up, and really teaching about how highly sensitive people start out in that kind of transcendent experience, just sensing and experiencing everything, and that it's up to us to work our way down and ground that information to really experience health, rather than working the other way where you're starting out in the physical and kind of working on opening up. That we're already wide open, being highly sensitive with these sensitive nervous systems. And so coming from that transcendent place and really self-actualizing and progressively moving down to a physiological result or reality. So that is an online program that I teach with different modules, and also there's an online community there as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So in these dialogues, I like to start off, as I get to know the person I'm talking to about their values. So I'm wondering, what would you say is your most important value in life, and kind of how did that become important to you, if you have some kind of story or anything about that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, the very first thing that popped into my mind was honesty. And I think that became so important to me because I think being highly sensitive, it was, I always felt that my truth and what I was experiencing in my life was very different than a lot of people around me. And so I found it very difficult to be honest, and not in the sense of like lying about, I don't know, small fibs kind of a thing, but really being honest about my feelings, being honest about my experience, and being vulnerable, sharing that. So I guess I really value honesty in that way. And in part, I would say because I have to. I have found that I'm a terrible liar. I'm a horrible poker player, and I find that I just feel absolutely terrible physically, emotionally, if I'm not just telling my full truth. So I would say that is probably one of the things that I value most.
So it's kind of the honesty of just kind of revealing what's going on in you is kind of an emotional level then. And how did that become important to you? Do you remember, if you kind of look back over your life, was there like a moment where it was like, oh, this is really important to me, or you kind of learned a lesson?
Oh yeah, I would say I've learned it many times. I'm actually writing a book right now called Super Sensitive, and it's about my experiences. And in it, I talk about, I went through a really distinct time period of change, and where I realized I was not living my life. And I went through a process of getting divorced and leaving a whole lifestyle that I had once had. And so I would say I learned it very strongly then, when I was really faced with this inconvenient truth of, this is not your life, and you got yourself here, and now what? And really feeling the pain of having to tell my truth, but then also in that same way, a huge relief, and really being able to see that telling the truth, even in that very difficult place, has led me to a really beautiful experience of life. So I think that was like a real strong experience of it, in terms of just being really scared, but kind of a pinnacle of like, it's going to be really crappy to tell the truth right now, but I know that I need to, and doing it and really seeing how supported by life I was in that.
So you kind of, when it had a really kind of a difficult situation, and then, you've been kind of hiding or not revealing as much as you'd wanted to, and then it kind of came to a crescendo, and then it's like you started sharing more, and you felt supported in doing that. That you kind of
definitely.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what I'm looking also at now is how people's values relate to empathy. And how do you think that honesty relates to the value of empathy? How do those two values relate to each other?
Well, I've learned for myself, being highly sensitive, I feel like I always could feel a lot of what other people were feeling, and I would place that as a priority. And I think I used to think that's what empathy was just feeling what other people were feeling. But in that process, I was missing myself. And so I wasn't actually able to just really, now as I look at it, I wouldn't call that empathy because I was losing myself in it. And that actually, so I would say that honesty comes in as of really being able to be in that difficult position of being honest with where you're at, what you're feeling, and allowing yourself also to be honest about where someone else is, and to really both engage there, that you are not trying to pretend like you don't feel the way that you feel, but that bringing your honest feelings into the situation also doesn't have to mean that someone else can't also have their honest feelings, and being able to have that kind of both and experience with the honesty rather than either or. And so I think that really, I mean, for me, I think that that's a trick of empathy, really, I wouldn't say trick, but just a real, something I have to put a lot of attention on, is that's how I can be very empathic, is how honest am I being about where I am right now? Can I really sit here and have this conversation? Can I really engage with someone in this way? And if I'm choosing that, to really do it with completely open eyes about where I am and where they are.
Yeah, so a lot of people feel that if they're empathizing, they have to sacrifice themselves. And it's like, oh, it's all about you. And then you end up maybe losing yourself. And that empathy is like holding, your humanity as well as mine at the same time, it sounds like. So, and so the honesty is, it sounds like, is the importance of sharing your humanity in that, so you're hearing both your own and the other person's humanity.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay. Well, one thing I find also is kind of a fun way to look at empathy is metaphorically, in terms of definitions. And, often empathy is described as standing in someone else's shoes, looking through someone else's eyes. And for me, empathy is like a cornucopia in the sense that it kind of opens up my sense of experience. I can feel other people's experiences as well as mine. That enriches my life. So do you have a metaphor of what empathy is like to you, kind of from a metaphorical point of view?
Well, this is such a good question because I love to use metaphors. And I was thinking, and I couldn't come up directly with a metaphor. The thing that really, this relates to empathy. I really love the word compassion, and I'm kind of a nerd about words and their origins and where they come from and what they mean. And I really like thinking about it like a compass, like you're really completely encompassing someone, and that you are drawing that circle around them. And so I don't know that that's exactly a metaphor, but I like to think about it that way, that you're intentionally starting somewhere and moving all the way around the situation so that you really create a nice container, that you have that circle, you have that place where you're standing together. And so I think about it like a connection and a container in that way, in kind of a compass metaphor, if that makes sense.
Yes, so empathy is like a compass in the sense that it creates a container for you and the other person to be within. Is that right? Is that?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
And what would be the opposite? Like if you had a metaphor for the opposite of empathy?
I guess the opposite just feels like almost just kind of like soggy bread. Like there's just like this mushiness, like there's no intentionality, you're not creating that space to be together, that it's just very mushy and falling apart.
Okay, well, now, if how do we go from this state of mushiness to the state of the encompassing? I mean, that's what really what these dialogues are about. Is how do we get from the society, which is kind of a mushy society in general, to this state of the container where people are kind of connected? And I think that's what we can explore. But actually, before we do that, maybe we can go into some of these other definitions because, you're talking about highly sensitive people, and I've been really interested in empaths and this whole empath community. And I'm not quite sure of all these definitions and what they kind of mean. So maybe you can go into a little bit of what you see highly sensitive people being, and what that means, as well as empaths, just from your experience.
Yeah. Well, I find that highly sensitive person is more of a broad category. And I use that term the way that Dr. Elaine Aron has defined it. She's a researcher and the person who coined the term highly sensitive person. She has a number of books about this genetic trait of 20% of the population who have a more highly sensitive nervous system. So the trait itself is called sensory sensitivity. And so it just means that there's a greater depth of processing, greater emotional sensitivity, greater sensory sensitivity, and so also a greater likelihood to become overwhelmed because there's all of this information all the time. And so I think about that like just having naturally very thin boundaries, and I think about it on like a spectrum of boundaries, that people who are hardier have thicker skin, they have thicker boundaries, they're able to tolerate and be with more external stimulation because they have that natural boundary to be able to feel their own feelings. And I find that highly sensitive people are just naturally have thinner boundaries externally, and so they're just constantly feeling what's going on around them, and that can be in every way. It can be the lighting, it can, as well as the emotions and sensations that someone else is feeling. And so not all highly sensitive people their nervous systems aren't picking up on the exact same things in the exact same way. And so I would say that empaths are a subgroup of highly sensitive people who do very much feel the feelings of other people, and they're very much feeling in that way. And I would not say that all highly sensitive people do that, though their sensory sensitivity may not be in that way. And so and I find there are kind of a couple other little subgroups of highly sensitive people, but that's the main distinction I would make. And that while I would say most highly sensitive people can pick up on the emotions of others, that may not be necessarily that they would have that kind of same experience the way someone who would define themselves as an empath would.
Well, you're saying that there's about 20% of the population that has that sensitivity. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
Well, I was an only child until I was 11, and kind of very independent. So I always had pretty strong boundaries, and so for me, it's been working towards kind of opening up and for connecting more and what have you. And I go to this freestyle dance, and the instructor there, Ava, she's talked about growing up, and her parents or her mother was dying of cancer, and she felt she was always having to kind of attend to everyone in the family growing up, and she could never kind of get a sense of self. Mm-hmm. And so she's been always, when we kind of talk, she says, I don't want more empathy, I need to develop more boundaries. So is that kind of part of the highly sensitive people, is trying to learn how to create boundaries? And if so, how do you go about doing that? I guess the idea is really to be empathic, but have a sense of grounding and centeredness around that.
Yeah, and I think that's why I say I used to think that was empathy, to just be feeling always for other people and doing always for other people. And now I would say that that wasn't empathy, that was a codependence that I had that need. I wasn't feeling myself, and I wasn't engaging with myself there. And I find that highly sensitive people sometimes they can, because they don't just naturally have these boundaries, they can build up kind of walls around themselves and create actual like physical distance or in order to feel safe. And there can be lots of different kind of external walls around, which ultimately prevents intimacy because they feel so unsure of how to be around people or connect with people without losing themselves, without just giving and giving, because that information is so readily available. So I find that what actually needs to happen is that an internal strength has to come of being able to really bring your attention to your own internal sensations and really strengthen that connection and your awareness of your own sensations, because that will not be first nature to you. It will be much more obvious to pick up on everything around you coming at you. And so the kind of the main steps that I recommend, which, talking about it sounds very simple, and this could be a process that may take a year or 2 years or a longer amount of time, depending on your own individual circumstances, are to really liberate yourself to be able to feel okay sensing what you sense, and then progressively be able to learn how to tune into that and bring it into your body to a greater and greater concrete degree. So that I find being able to be more in tune with yourself does allow you then actually to be very empathic with people, because then you're having that honesty. You're able to really truthfully say, this is actually what I want to be doing right now. I'm not just doing this as a knee-jerk reaction to what you're going through. And so I work with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I find is actually also similar to kind of the Eastern chakra system. And starting out really in that transcendent, starting out with your just raw, pure sensation that you're picking up on, then moving into self-actualization, really bringing that into your body, noticing how you actually feel that in your body, noticing that you have a physical sensation related to it. And then from there, bringing it into what you want to be feeling, what your aesthetic need is there, what feels beautiful to you, what your desire is, and then having a cognitive understanding of what that might look like, and then bringing that into your actual life, then how that could possibly show up there. And then from there, what you actually commit to, what you actually do, and the risk you take to really show up and set that line or expose yourself in that way, reveal yourself. And then comes the safety needs, which are the where I find the boundaries really come in, of really feeling your emotions and being able to respond to them in a way that sets a container for you that feels good. Really identifying what you need there and what actually works for you there. And then you can have that physical result that you're wanting in your life. And I use a lot of hypnosis. I really like hypnosis for this, because it gets you out of, it can be easy to kind of stay in analysis paralysis when you're highly sensitive and try and figure everything out. And so really bringing it down into your body, being able to have that experience of letting go of your thoughts and letting go of the outcome, letting go of what you should do and shouldn't do, and really just feeling actually what's there and moving more into what you want and then getting that result.
Well, in terms of definition of empathy, there's a lot of kind of different ways of defining it, and sometimes it's a bit of a mess. But for me, empathy is like 4 parts to it. The first part is self-empathy, which is that sensory awareness, mindfulness of what's going on kind of in my body. The second part is the mirrored empathy, which is through mirror neurons. So as I'm seeing you, I saw you scratch, that I can actually feel, as I'm open, my awareness is open, that I can actually feel what it would be like to scratch through mirror neurons. I don't know if you're kind of studied the mirror neuron part of it. So, and then the third part is imaginative empathy, which is kind of, the academics call it perspective taking or cognitive empathy. And it's kind of the more taking someone's perspective, in a that kind of comes from self-awareness. It's that I'm a separate human being, you're a separate human being, and I can take your perspective as a separate human being. And then the fourth part is empathic action, which is that as we have that connection, we hold each other's humanity, you know, at the same time, that we're kind of negotiating how we're going to act together. And it's a kind of a negotiated sense of action towards maybe to, you know, what's important to us and kind of how we want to go forward in the relationship. So it sounds very similar to what you're talking about, in the sense that the first part is really that self-awareness, finding out what's going on inside yourself. And it sounds like you're using hypnosis as a way of kind of tapping into what's going on inside yourself. And maybe you're off, is this like self-hypnosis, or someone else's doing hypnosis with you, or how are you kind of doing that?
Well, I'm a clinical hypnotist, so the clients that I work with, I do that with them. And then I also have some hypnosis recordings for my online programs. And then for myself, I do also get my own hypnosis sessions.
Okay. And do you have other strategies for kind of that self-connection? There's so many different ways. There's meditation, I think, is one. Yoga, just kind of stretching your body, and kind of feeling what's going on. And in the dance that I do, there's all kinds of different processes too. So.
Yeah, I like all of those things. I think that, especially for highly sensitive people, experience is where they get into their body. So like you said, dance and, kind of ecstatic movement or 5 rhythms or things that are really helping them to feel the sensations in their body. And I actually also really highly recommend improv. I think that that is a really valuable tool for highly sensitive people to learn, and it usually scares most highly sensitive people to death to even think about it. And because that is so different, I think, from a lot of highly sensitive people's nature, to just show up and see what comes out of their mouth and show up and really feel what they're feeling and be in front of people and keep going and do what they're doing, staying engaged with all their sensations as well as with the audience. And so I really like that practice as well. And I find also automatic writing, which is a little bit different than journaling, where you just let yourself write and just see what comes out and just feeling what comes out. Because I think a lot of times highly sensitive people don't know what they're feeling, and they don't know themselves, they don't know what's going on, and it's simply because they haven't given themselves the context to translate that pure sensory information into words or into pictures or into something tangible they can work with. So any activity like that, where they're really able to just have some sort of spontaneous movement, whether it's writing or singing or dancing or yoga, and really begin to bring what they're feeling into a more tangible realm that they can work with it, and also perhaps share it with someone else to be able to translate it into words so that then it can be brought into a conversation.
So do you do improv acting? Do you have some group do you go to on a regular basis, or how are you doing that?
I used to. I haven't actually done it, and I'm hoping to start it again next month. But yeah, there's a particular teacher that I really like. His name's Josh Peiss, and his version is called Committed Impulse, and he kind of mixes a lot of like movement and yoga as well as improv. He is an actor and a yoga teacher, and so he mixes a lot of those modalities. But I think there are a lot of different sort of improv classes or troupes that you can go and just test it out.
Yeah, I do contact improv. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a very physical based improvised dance process, and I think because it has the physicality of it, it really raises the oxytocin level. So at the end of one of these dances, it's like I'm just kind of like floating. So it's really, really a wonderful process.
Yeah.
So, okay, so these are all different processes then for kind of connecting to ourselves, which is also maybe related to the honesty, kind of. And are you doing more? Oh, there was another process I was wondering is being empathically heard yourself. There's some groups where you can go and kind of share what's going on for you, and the whole group kind of reflects back what they're hearing. So you're kind of like the center. You don't have to try to empathize with someone else. Just you're kind of getting bathed in empathy. Do you do anything in that way, or?
Yes, I find that. Well, I do. I've just started doing some retreats this year, and they've gone really well. It's been really wonderful. I've done a number of different sort of groups in the past, but I find that the retreat experience for highly sensitive people allows them to have more time together, where they actually get, and we intentionally do some kind of experiences where they get to be vulnerable and trust each other and create that container. And then I find I do a practice where they get to share what they've noticed and appreciated about each other. And I find that so valuable for sensitive people, because a lot of times what other people may appreciate about a highly sensitive person wouldn't have the same kind of meaning that it does for them. And so, for me, someone may honor and appreciate, the way I've decorated my living room, which to me is not that big of a deal. But then for someone to know maybe how difficult it was for me to stand up on stage, that and really being able to be honored in that way. And so I think that in that way, I do those sorts of practices where highly sensitive people are able to gather together and really see each other and appreciate each other and just hear each other's experiences. So I do, and I actually have a retreat coming up next month in September where they're able to share, just share themselves without even necessarily having to have a response. Nothing about what they say has to be fixed or changed, or that it can just be shared and witnessed and experienced. And I think that is very important.
Well, a little bit that I've looked into the kind of the world of empaths. I've heard some, it's like people who are empaths or highly sensitive people, they're having difficulty with being kind of overwhelmed. And kind of one strategy I heard was things like conceptual things. Like imagine you have a wetsuit on, and it's this form of energy, and it's blocking the other energy from other people. And what do you think about those kind of strategies? For me, it seems like it's kind of defensive, and that there's other ways that are more, I don't know, maybe not so defensive kind of strategies, that it would be more, I don't know. I'm just trying to understand it myself. So.
Yeah, well, I guess I have a couple responses to that. One is that I do find visualization, that's why I like to use hypnosis. I find visualization is very helpful for sensitive people, because a lot of their world and a lot of what they're dealing with is not tangible. They're not physically seeing it or holding it. It's this sensory experience. And so I do find, visuals maybe like a wetsuit or things like that can be helpful, because then it brings something that is otherwise sort of amorphous into something they can work with. And then secondly, I find that sensitive people go through kind of phases of strengthening themselves. And that initially, I find it can be helpful to just allow yourself that permission to not feel, and in that way to be a little bit defensive, to sort of create a bubble. If you're so used to just constantly being overwhelmed by people and other feelings and having, no idea what's going on and just constant overwhelm, then it's actually, I find, a good first step for them to be able to feel like they can create that bubble or that wetsuit or whatever it is, to not have to feel everything all the time for a short time, and to create that. But that ultimately, yes, I would agree that that's not a long-term solution, and that what we're doing is strengthening themselves, building their trust with themselves and their ability to hear their own voice, their own desires, their own feelings and sensations amidst everything else. And that there is actually a strengthening that happens there, kind of like when you go to the gym and work out over time, your muscles actually get stronger and stronger, and then you can actually lift more weight. And I find the exact same thing, that these are like muscles that we're developing, and that they do kind of live in this protected space for a short time, but then ultimately they get strong enough to be able to take off the wetsuit, not be in that situation, and be able to stay engaged with themselves and feel the sensation. Because I don't think that any human being, if you're putting up that barrier, any barrier at all, whatever it is, will prevent intimacy. And so of course, if though you're not feeling strong enough to be able to be around someone and still connect and tune into yourself, then some kind of remedial work could be valuable there. But that ultimately, yes, we're getting to the point where they don't have to have that barrier there, and where they really can trust in their ability to listen to themselves.
Well, what I'm wondering about in terms of ways of dealing with that overwhelm, have you looked at like reflecting back what's going on? In the sense that it seems that part of the overwhelm is kind of taking on what it is that someone is saying, and kind of, not knowing how to process it, or emotionally not being able to kind of work with it. But there's a way of just saying what it is that you're seeing the other person say, and that sort of you become a mirror, and you kind of reflect back and actually hear the other person, and you don't really take it on. It's like it doesn't become like a judgment, or you don't take on a defense. What do you think about that? It's actually part of that mirrored empathy that in the first part is that self-empathy that you're talking about, and the honesty and connecting with what's going on. But the other part is really kind of reflecting the spirit, the feelings of someone else, and kind of being there as a mirror, and not necessarily kind of being overwhelmed that your whole consciousness is kind of overwhelmed by it.
Definitely. And I think that I would say that mirroring is a part of it, and that really being able to learn and practice and do that is so valuable. And just having that experience of being able to just hear what someone's saying and not take it on, hear it and like you said, reflect it back to them, and be there with that. And I think though also then ultimately being able to pair that as, I hear you and I'm reflecting that back to you, but then also I think one of the greatest gifts and that we can give anybody is our self, our full connection, and that ultimately then being able also to share yourself with them and is also valuable. And that it doesn't have to be the ability to share yourself without trying to fix is, I think, such a gift. And that I think it does have to start though first with really being able to mirror and hear, okay, I hear where you are. It sounds like this is your position, but then also being able to add to it, and here's where I am, and here's me, and here's what I share. And like you said earlier, I think then the negotiation is such a beautiful process when there are two people there, like you said, holding their humanity, that then being able to negotiate and come out with a completely new result that was maybe not even conceivable before that conversation. And so that reflection, I think, is a good part of it, but I do think also that there needs to then be a way to then also share oneself too, not just be a mirror, but then also acknowledge that you are a person there too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's not just constantly being a mirror, that you want to share part of yourself in that holding mm-hmm. both, mm-hmm. and you need to share what's going on. And I found, for example, I've done a lot of interviews with people just saying, well, tell me about your values, what's your most important value, and then I'll ask for the story like I did with you, and then they don't know what the story, they can't come up with the story. They say, I can't remember a story. I'll say, well, I have a story, let me share that. And then after I share a story, it's like, oh, I've got a story now. So the sharing of yourself, I find, actually contributes to the other person being able to go deeper and connect with something within themselves.
Definitely. And I think that that's one of, um, I don't know, I guess it's a funny kind of paradox where it's like just the revealing of yourself where you are gives so much permission and allows you to go deeper, because even if you don't really know where you want to go, just saying, well, I'm not sure, and then giving the other person space to share themselves and really hear that allows you to connect with your own humanity more and go, oh yeah, I do actually have stories. I get, because I've witnessed him, I am then also able to witness myself better. And that it kind of can be this sort of a reflection, kind of this infinite experience of self. One practice actually that I really like to do, that I think maybe you might also really enjoy, that just came to mind, is to do some eye gazing. So you just sit across from a person, whatever distance feels comfortable to you, but close enough where you can look into their eyes, and just mentally, both of you are saying, it's nice to have someone leading this exercise. So when I lead this, I would say, now imagine just the words, I see you, and notice how that feels. Feel that in your body. And so at that same time, they're just saying, I see you mentally, and seeing this person in front of them. And then we move on to, okay, now imagine I see you seeing me. And they just sit with that and see how that's feeling. And then we take it further. I see you seeing me, seeing you. And that seems to allow an even deeper kind of settling into the body, a little bit more of a relief. And then the last one that I do, which often doesn't make any sense, is I see you seeing me, seeing you, seeing me. And obviously you could go on infinitely with that. But I find that brings a lot of relief, because a lot of times as human beings, I think we just feel like we're in the spotlight. Like people are just looking at us and criticizing or judging. And that it brings a lot of relief to realize, oh, I'm seeing you and I'm being seen. And I know that you see me. And I know that you see me seeing you, and that it creates this real vulnerability and space to be human together, and to reveal ourselves. And there is just sort of there's a great comfort there, where it doesn't have to be competitive and it doesn't have to be judgmental, and it can really just be a sharing of this experience of life rather than trying to figure it out or do it right.
It has a sense of connection to it as well, because if I just, for me, kind of feeling that, I imagine people seeing me, and then it's like all the eyes on me, like public speaking or something, I get kind of like nervous. But and then it's kind of a sense of alienation there. If eyes are looking at me, I feel, oh, everybody's looking at me. But it's like, I see you seeing me. It has a sense of, I feel like a sense of connection with the others through that.
Definitely. And I find always after we do this exercise, it brings this, whoever's been paired up just feels this deep appreciation for their partner. Like because it's like you get to release all of that like tension of judgment. And so then they actually just really get to see each other's beauty, for who they are as that individual. And I find always there is that great connection that's formed, that just really being able to have that experience with someone is, I think, on just even a physiological level, very powerful, and does shift the way that you experience that person and the way you feel them experiencing you.
Yeah, so there's so many exercises like that can be used to really develop that self-awareness, or that sensory awareness. I recently took part in a workshop from the Compassionate Listening Project. They're a group in Seattle, but they came down to the Bay Area, and they did a similar exercise, but it was seeing the person see you and then really feeling what's going on in your body. And you try different things, closing your eyes, them closing their eyes, and just watching what's going on in your body to develop that sensitivity to be able to read your emotions, and maybe then you talk about it afterwards. You're able to translate those feelings into words as well.
Yeah. And I think that's a big part of it, that because I think so much we're feeling these feelings all the time, when you walk down the street, when you go to the grocery store, and we just don't take the time or to tune in there, to pay attention. So it's nice to really have that be the focus, to make the elephant in the room the focus, and be able to acknowledge, oh yeah, when everybody's looking at me, I feel really uncomfortable with that, and just to own that and to feel that, and that you don't have to avoid it and you don't have to change it, and that you can just really reveal that to yourself and to everyone, and then keep connecting and stay present and stay there rather than distracting from it, and go. I find it's sort of almost like a portal where you get to go deeper in and deeper into your connection, and so having that kind of awareness about, how do I feel in these social situations? How do I feel having someone look at me? How do I feel looking at someone? And going into that feeling is super valuable.
Well, what I'm really looking at too is, how do we change society so that society in general is more supportive of empathy, and that actually that empathy becomes like one of the primary social values. And I'm wondering kind of what your thoughts are on that. Is it even a good goal or vision, or and how do we get there if it is?
Well, I would say that it is a valuable goal, and one that that's a real big priority for me personally. The work that I do is really helping sensitive people to become sensitive leaders, because I think that with that sensitivity and that compassion, there, to lead with sensitivity, compassion, and empathy is incredibly valuable, and that is something that I really encourage and work with. And so I think, from my perspective and what I'm doing, I think that having a shift in how we see even the word leadership is so important, and that a lot of times the people who would shy away from leadership or not see themselves as leaders often make the best leaders, because actually they don't have that desire for manipulation or pushing and controlling, that it's actually a desire to connect and to serve the group and to serve the whole, and to feel all the needs of the whole, and to negotiate that rather than just the agenda or needs of one or a few. And so I think that's one thing. But I think that in a more grand sense, I see the difficulty of it, because so many of our systems are set up in more of a competitive mentality. And so it's difficult, I know, to be operating empathically in a competitive culture. But I think that every single human being has this ability to be vulnerable. And that I think, like we were talking about earlier, by my being more vulnerable, I give permission, being more vulnerable in a powerful way, being, present with myself, honest about where I am, and sharing that, not in a mushy way, but in a really, creating a container for myself, can then give that permission for vulnerability to no longer be equated with weakness. And that vulnerability gets to then become power and strength and resource. So I think even in our everyday interactions, out on the street, if somebody cuts you off, if you're in the grocery store and someone bumps into you, to be able to sit with yourself and to be vulnerable there rather than reactive, to slow down and to feel yourself and be able to engage with that person vulnerably, I think can create a shift and a more of a ground level that I think can definitely spread and does spread.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of, if people can model the empathy, that will kind of kind of be a model for others to follow, maybe in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to add one more thing. I think that the piece that is really important is understanding that being vulnerable doesn't mean losing yourself. That I think a lot of times in those situations, people feel like, oh, if I was being a good person or doing the good thing, I would just say it's okay, or I'm sorry, and move on. But that actually, we all miss out. That actually sharing your vulnerability means also sharing yourself where you're really at right there. Oh, that hurt, or that felt uncomfortable for me, and I want to connect with you, rather than losing yourself or losing them. And I know that's a very tricky thing to do, but I think that if even every individual could practice that would make a huge difference.
Well, I've been thinking about the vulnerability, and it's kind of, one is vulnerable when one's afraid of being judged, right? It's like you're afraid of what you're going to bring up. You're going to be judged by others, and it's going to hurt, because that alienation, when someone judges you, there's like this feeling of alienation, and that alienation is maybe painful. So if I'm in with a group of friends who are not non-judgmental and very open and accepting, I can kind of share anything, and it's not even like vulnerability, right? It's like I'm just sharing, I'm just being myself. And when I asked for metaphors, from other people, some metaphors, I remember someone said it's like empathy is like a puppy dog pile, right? These little puppies are just playful. And then someone else said empathy is like a magic room where whoever you are is fine, which is kind of a little bit along those lines. It's just that you can be who you are when your environment is not judging you, and you don't have fear of that. So it's almost like it's not even vulnerability anymore. It's just being you. So the vulnerability almost for me implies there's society, a container of judgment that I have to be kind of work. And so it's really like, I guess I'm looking at, let's change the society and the social structures. Like you're saying, the school system is competitive, the political system is competitive, we have a competitive justice system, two lawyers kind of battle it out. And, that we really need to change the social structures so that for the justice system that we have, like restorative justice, which restores connection. I actually like to call it restorative empathy. So there is that, modeling, but I also kind of see the sense that we need to change the society, the social structures, so that structurally that they support connection. And so.
Well, and I think that I have a very strong belief in entrepreneurship, and that's part of with the sensitive leaders that I teach. That I think it's hard for any huge organization to care about the individual. It's just really not in the best interest of a large organization to focus on the individual. But I think in smaller organizations, in small businesses, and entrepreneurs who are really innovating and doing things well, the individual does matter. That when we're creating these smaller communities of and people are receiving services and interacting and getting their needs met, their social needs, their all of their needs, that I think there's more accountability there. And so I agree, and I think I can see that. And what I think is valuable is more entrepreneurs, more people doing these types of things. I have the privilege and opportunity to work with people who work in school systems, and they're doing consulting and innovating and changing things there, and working in governmental policy, and so I think it has to start with individuals stepping up and leading, creating a solution that works better, and that we can start to adopt and move towards, and having that greater accountability through smaller communities rather than these huge corporations that can't possibly care about the individual.
So you're hoping that it'll be small groups and organizations kind of getting together and creating these empathic environments and be kind of like a model maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So is there other ideas? We've gone almost an hour. I want to be sure I feel like we could kind of talk for hours on this. So it's really a lot of fun. Other ideas that you feel we need to cover or that are important that we haven't covered? Or insights, especially about how do we build a culture of empathy? You know, how do we foster empathy in society?
Well, I think the point that you brought up earlier is really important, that being vulnerable comes with a fear of judgment, like that it's easy, you know, around people you feel safe with to share your deepest, darkest secrets, but it's that fear of judgment. And I think in terms of especially the way, you know, how I look at things, that I think I do think it's important to understand that there may be people we're all starting from different places. Like for me, as a highly sensitive person who also tends to be introverted, I get my energy by going inside, by spending time alone and tuning in. And also I start out feeling it all, you know, feeling everything. And so it helps me to know, okay, that's my starting point. And now in order to connect to someone, I have to, kind of like your friend who's the instructor, I have to then say, okay, where am I here? And bring that into my body and use that in my body and start there and come through that to connect with someone. Whereas I think it's helpful for, you know, someone who may be hardier, someone who's starting with simply their own feelings, to also understand that maybe I have a different starting place altogether. I'm starting out here. I'm not starting in here with a very specific understanding that I'm angry, you know, like that, you know, someone who's hardier, that may be where they're starting, saying, oh, I know that I feel angry about this situation. And that if understanding your own starting place kind of, and then also understanding that whoever you're talking with or interacting with may have their own very different starting place, and being able to know both of those pieces, I think, is so important for empathy. To know, you know, if I know you're clear across on the other side of the river, you know, then okay, we're gonna have to figure out how to, you know, one or the other of us to get across, and that matters. I need to know that information if I want to connect with you. And so I think a lot of the judgment can be taken off if we really understand that there is this emotional terrain that looks completely different, and being able to just really acknowledge the emotional terrain, and that it's not anybody's fault that we may be in that position, but just really acknowledging, okay, you're clear over on the other side of the mountain. This is what we're dealing with, and I want to connect with you. So how do we do this? And that it doesn't have to be their fault or my fault that we're having a difficult time connecting. And to sometimes I find allowing that freedom of the unknown, that sometimes for me also I've found even being able to just say, there seems to be this mountain in between us and I don't really know what to do about it, is much better than, there's this mountain in between us and I'm going to just try and pound it out and we're going to keep going. And that's also not empathic. That really being able to honor what is in that kind of terrain where you're both starting from, and sometimes take a break, take a breather, and acknowledge there's something here I don't know how to engage with, even though I want to. So I guess I would say overall from that, just that I think it is really valuable and important to understand there is this unseen terrain that we're dealing with, as well as just what may look like on the physical outside.
And it sounds like you're saying that don't judge it either. It's like take the judgment out of judging yourself and judging the other, and just kind of see what is and try to bring that to the surface and look at it and acknowledge it and see what maybe develops.
Mm-hmm,
like that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, great. This has been a lot of fun. Really learned more about this whole area. I do want to continue in this area, kind of exploring, highly sensitive, people and empaths and this whole field, because it seems like here are people who are already have a lot of those skills. And if they kind of nurture those skills and find good, productive ways of holding them and fostering them, that it can be a really great contribution to society. So
Definitely. I think especially in terms of empathy. And I feel like that there is this whole, world of these 20% of the population who maybe has a very difficult time even knowing how to show up and how to live. And they can be very instructive in creating this culture of empathy that you're talking about, which I so support and appreciate your website and all that you're doing to help create that right now. So
yeah, and I'm grateful for all the tools you're developing, around this and the education and material. So I hope we can continue the dialogue and maybe do some panels around this and
definitely
keep it going. Okay, then Annie, for now I'll say goodbye and look forward to taking some next steps then around this.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.